Hey guys, we're back updating the power rankings for Big Brother 27 towards the end of week 4, which was another pretty eventful week, even though it's not necessarily for the right reasons, and I'm not entirely sure if I like the trajectory the season's going on, but that's just Big Brother for you. Now I am recording this on Tuesday, August 5th, and if you're new to the channel, or if you only follow the show through the televised episodes, I will be discussing what's been happening on the live feeds, and in doing so, I'll be spoiling the results of both the veto competition and the veto meeting, so if you don't want to be spoiling that stuff, this is your chance to click out the video. But we have 15 people to talk about, and let's waste some more time. Let's go into the video. So starting off at number 15, we have the latest boo from the season, and here we have Adrian. And Adrian going out made a lot of sense by the end of it. He was a pretty clear target considering where things were going. Now, yes, there was his talk about this plan to tie the vote if he was up against Will, where there was this contingent in place to keep Adrian around with Lauren breaking a tie. And it did seem for a moment that it could have happened until Zach and Vince backed out of it due to Ava pushing them and them getting scared about them possibly causing waves in the house, which really speaks to what Vince and Zach are like as players. And through that, Adrian does get taken out here after he fails to win the BB Blockbuster. And in a lot of ways, I feel like Adrian is what I expected from him coming to the season, where I didn't feel too great about him. I was pretty low on him in the preseason, and I feel like for the most part, he delivered upon what I expected from him. And at the point where he was at the bottom, I feel like there wasn't really that much he could do to get out of it. And I feel like there was a lot wrong that he did to cause himself to be at the bottom, with him pretty openly voting against the rest of the house in week 1 by voting to keep Zay in the house, which is not great. You have him trying to lean into this perception of him being this loyal player and someone who is weak. And while I can see where he was coming from with him trying to be like Dan early on BB10, I feel like it just wasn't that effective, with him not really branching out and building the social connections that he needed to. And with him also proving that he was a con competitor, with him winning the week 2 Blockbuster and with him almost winning the week 2 veto as well. It just made it so that people saw him as pretty threatening, and him talking about how he was pretty loyal wasn't very beneficial to the people that he was not aligned with. So through that, I do feel like he did things wrong to cause his boot. Though at the same time, I do also feel bad for him, where I feel like he came off as a very endearing player in the house, with him very clearly wanting to be there and being passionate about the game, and also with him talking a lot about his family and how he needs the money. I do really feel bad for Adrian, and you can clearly tell how crushed he was when he was eventually taken out. So while I do think he has plenty of holes in his game, I do like Adrian a lot on a personal level, and he's now out of the game to where he's here at number 15. And with that, we have 14 people left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based on their current game position. But at number 15, we have the person who is the most likely to go out on Thursday night, and here we have Jimmy. And to me, Jimmy being the target here just further cements the comparisons to Heisem from BB25, where I feel like they fulfill pretty similar archetypes, but also had similar paths in the game, with them having pretty bad week 2 HOHs and eventually being targeted by their own allies by the end of it. So I do feel like Jimmy being the target on Mickey's HOH is pretty bad, and I do think he did a lot to bring that about. And we'll obviously talk about the Mickey and Morgan side of it soon enough, but again, I do think it really speaks to how poorly Jimmy played his week 2 HOH, where despite him having this bond with Mickey early on through the triple threat, he ends up pushing her away during his HOH and trying to get in more with Catherine and Lauren. And despite Jimmy later trying to get back with Mickey and Morgan afterwards, it was just too late. And it was at that point that his actions had caused Mickey to no longer trust him. And despite Jimmy clearly being this loyal ally to Mickey at this current point, the fact that Mickey puts him up anyway as a target really speaks to how much damage he had done to that relationship earlier on. And while we'll talk about the Mickey and Morgan side of it soon enough, it is pretty bad gameplay from Jimmy, the fact that he ends up being the target on an HOH that should have been favorable to him. And on top of that, I feel like he hasn't played this week particularly well either, where I feel like he didn't really defend himself super well when talking to Mickey after the veto meeting, and with there being plenty of people that want Jimmy to go out regardless, I do feel like Jimmy played pretty poorly, and the fact that he is going out on his own allies HOH is a real testament to how poorly he played across these early weeks. Though with that said, I still feel like he has a shot of staying through the BB Blockbuster, even though it is going to be a bit tough going up against Riley and Kelly there. But still, the fact that he is the target, the fact that it does seem like he is going home unless he does win that Blockbuster, really speaks to how dire his current position is, which is why he's here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, and we have another person currently on the block, and here we have Kelly. And the reason Kelly's above Jimmy is that she would stay over Jimmy which I think is actually a pretty big pro to her. The fact that she has been like this pretty clear block star during a lot of the season and someone who would have gone out on many opportunities had she stayed up on the block. No, now she's in a spot to where she'll at least stay if she's still on the block on eviction night. That's something at least, to where she's not the primary target over Jimmy. Then also she does seem to be a bit more aware in the game where she at least recognizes that volunteering for the block is not a good thing and that maybe she shouldn't like constantly be on the block. And she is at least picking up on Vince being a target. She is at least having a bit more game conversation. So I do think Kelly is at least picking at the game a little bit. Though at the same time, she's still in a pretty bad spot. She is still like this pariah in the house that no one really wants to work with. And she is someone who would go home if Jimmy does win the blockbuster. So I feel like those things are still pretty bad for her. And I still feel like she's a very unlikely person to win the game. Though it's the fact that she's at least going to stay over Jimmy that leaves her here on number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we're moving on now to people who are not on the block, but are poised to be in a pretty bad position after this week, assuming things go according to plan. But number 12, we do have Ashley. And I feel like Ashley is going to be one of the most vulnerable people in the house after this week, assuming Jimmy goes out, where Jimmy is one of her closest allies. Jimmy is also a target ahead of her. And I do feel like Jimmy is someone that is really sticking up for Ashley in the game, to where I feel like without Jimmy, that leaves Ashley pretty open to be taken out here. And there is actually talk about Ashley being targeted next week, with the likes of Catherine, Keanu, and Riley all being very open to targeting her. And I do think Ashley is going to be in a pretty bad spot afterwards, unless Jimmy wins the blockbuster. Though even then, I still feel like Ashley is someone who could probably be a backup target if Jimmy were to stay in the game, to where I feel like Ashley is someone who really is going to be on the outs afterwards, where I feel like the likes of Vince and Zach and that side of the house are going to be in power after this week, with them really getting the numbers there. And I do feel like that really leaves Ashley in this pretty prime spot to be taken out, not to mention the fact that Ashley was pretty open about her disapproval of the Jimmy move, where she confronted Mickey about it afterwards, and there's really a lot of tension now between them. So I do feel like Ashley is someone who I feel like is probably one of the least likely people to win from this point on, considering her current position and considering the fact that I do expect her to be targeted in the near future. So I feel like I'm not feeling great about Ashley's prospects at this current point, which is why she's here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and we have yet another person who I'm expecting to be in a pretty bad spot after this week. But number 11, we do have Rachel Riley. And I do feel like this was a pretty bad week for Rachel here, where despite her being in a pretty good spot last week, I feel like this week just really blew up her game, with Jimmy being put up, who is one of her closest allies and someone who is pretty likely to go out at this point. And I feel like with Jimmy going out, that really leaves Rachel exposed as well. And very similar to Ashley, there has been a lot of talk about Rachel being a target within the next few weeks, where we know the likes of Vince and Catherine have very openly talked about putting Rachel up. And in general, there's a lot of talk about how people want to take out Rachel right as the jury is starting, which is quite a bit different from where she was before, where before there were a lot of people want to take Rachel very deep into the season. How, and while a lot of that was informed by people thinking that she couldn't win a jury vote, it was still something that would give Rachel a lot of longevity. But now it's shifted to Rachel being a threat and how people don't want her around and that they just want to drag her to jury and then take her out as soon as possible. And Rachel herself knows this and even asked Mickey at a point to put her up and send her home, as if she doesn't have any shot of winning, she might as well go out pre-jury. And while she did later back down from that, I do feel like it really speaks to just how narrow of a path Rachel has in the game, just in general, due to her stature in the house and her overall desire to be there. But I feel like at this point, Rachel's standing in the house has really weakened, with people talking about taking her out in the early jury phase, with her influence in the house really waning, and with her position just going downhill to the point where she's about to lose one of her closest allies, and she is a pretty prime target from the other side of the house, which is pretty prime to get the numbers anyway. So I feel like at this point, Rachel has really dropped off to me to where she's here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have someone who I'm sure a lot of people were expecting to be at the very bottom, but number 10, we do have the current HOH, and here we have Mickey, and wow. Somehow Mickey has played an even worse HOH than all the other people so far in a season that has had nothing but bad HOHs so far and people just not making moves that benefit their game. Mickey managed to blow all those people out of the water by just completely sinking her game across this one week, where she came into this week in a pretty decent position, and I feel like that was reflected across her power ranking placements in previous weeks, but she ends up completely sabotaging her game and just putting herself in a pretty unwinnable position by the end of this week here, where for one, I feel like she really mismanages the Riley situation where she ends up obviously stealing Riley's HOH through her power and goes even further by putting him up on the block, but then just backs out of targeting him where she ends up feeling bad for everything she did and even rules out putting Catherine up as a renom and really just backs down and tries to make a deal with Riley and Catherine for protection, which just feels like a half measure by itself. Like the damage is already done by having put him up, and considering that Riley was already going to put her up had he kept his HOH, I feel like she should have just committed to taking him out, but just really lets her emotions get the better of her. And then afterwards, she settles on targeting Jimmy due to not really trusting Jimmy, despite Jimmy being someone who is pretty loyal to her by that point and being this pretty blatant shield for her as well, and gets so tunnel vision as well, and ironically ends up making the same mistakes that Jimmy made during his HOH, where she had gotten so upset by Jimmy getting tunnel visioned and not really listening to his allies in terms of him targeting Amy, but yet now she's doing the same thing and targeting Jimmy and not really considering other options, even though she had previously considered targeting Vince as well, but backs out of that due to Morgan's connection to him and really just blows up her entire side of the house across this week, where she ends up burning her relationships with Ashley and Rachel and obviously taking out Jimmy in the process, and decides to go all in on working with Zach and Vince, which is a pretty terrible situation for her, where she's on the bottom of that group of 4, and she herself even knows this and even tells Morgan that she's on the bottom of it, which is another pretty bad move by itself. And I feel like Mickey has put herself in a significantly worse spot at this point, where she just enables the likes of Zach and Vince to take control of the game moving forward. So I feel like Mickey really gave up a lot of control across this week. She is taking out one of her allies. She ends up burning a lot of bridges that she previously had, and she's leaving herself in a position where she is, again, in a worse spot than she was before, but is also still a pretty big target in the house, where she has continued to be talked about as a target by the likes of Keanu, and Ashley is now talking about targeting her. Even Zach and Vince don't really want to keep her around long term. So I feel like she just completely blew up her game for really no gain, and is completely misguided in her approach to targeting Jimmy and is just throwing him out for no reason. So I feel like this was a pretty disastrous HOH train for Mickey, which is obviously saying a lot considering that we haven't had a single good HOH all season, but I really feel like Mickey sank her game across this HOH train here. It's for that reason that I can't have her any higher than number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have yet another person who is going to be in a pretty bad spot after this week, but at number 9 we do have Will, and really there's not that much to say about Will. I feel like he was very passive across this week, and it's pretty clear at this point that he's not really playing the game much anymore, which is quite the departure from where he was in the first 2 weeks of the show. But I feel like at this point, Will is someone who is, again, not in the majority at this point. Losing Jimmy would be pretty bad for him. And while there's not really as much push to take out Will compared to the other people we already talked about, I feel like Will is a pretty unlikely winner at this point, considering the way that he's playing the game, which is why he's here at number 9. I'm moving on to number 8, and I can't believe this person is this high, but considering where we're currently at, I did decide to have Keanu here at number 8, and I actually think there's a serious argument for Keanu being even one spot higher, as I feel like he made fewer mistakes this week compared to the next person we'll be talking about. But I feel like Keanu is someone who I do think is gaining a little bit of influence in the game. Now, at the end of the day, it's still not that much, where I still expect him to be someone who's used as a pawn moving forward and could be a backup target in certain situations, where he was even the primary target coming to this week until he won the veto again. And I still have the same fundamental issues with Keanu's game as I've had before, where I feel like he has a pretty bad read on the house, where I feel like he doesn't fully see the picture. I think he also has pretty bad relationships. I still think he is not really playing to his best interest, and I still don't think he's in anyone's long-term plans, to where I would expect him to once again be someone put up on the block and potentially taken out if certain comp results play out a certain way. However, you do have to give him a little bit of credit for kind of convincing Mickey to put up Jimmy, where he was able to trick them into thinking that he wouldn't target them. And again, how much of it is effective gameplay versus Mickey just being so committed on targeting Jimmy that she was willing to listen to anything, I don't know. But I still think Keanu deserves a little bit of credit, and I think with there being bigger targets in the house at this point, I do think there is, again, a decreasing likelihood that Keanu is the primary target in future weeks. But at the end of the day, it is still Keanu. I still don't really have that much faith in him as a player. And I feel like a lot of his longevity in the game will come down to his ability to win competitions, which I do think is another pro. The fact that he is consistently shown to win vetoes, I think that's something to point out. But beyond that, I feel like there isn't that much reason to have Keanu too much higher. The reason he's even this high is because of how much other people have dropped compared to how much he's really risen. But I do think he has risen a little bit to where he's here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have yet another person who I'm not feeling that great about at this point. But number 7, we do have Morgan. And I think there's an argument for Morgan being right down where Mickey is, as I feel like this week just really confirmed to me that Morgan's not playing to win the game. I feel like Morgan, very similar to Mickey, is very misguided in how she's approaching the game, namely through her relationship with Vince, where she has gone all in on wanting to work with Vince and Zach. I feel like Morgan has convinced herself that what is best for Vince and Zach's game is somehow good for Morgan's game, which in itself is a pretty flawed way of approaching the game, as she's not really playing that much for herself. But I think what makes it even worse is that Vince and Zach aren't even that loyal to Morgan herself, where Vince and Zach are closer to Lauren than they are to Morgan, and they are very much willing to dispose of Morgan if it suits them later on in the game. So I feel like the fact that Morgan is completely loyal to Vince and Zach while they are not loyal to her in return is a massive blind spot in Morgan's game, and one that I think will ultimately cost her. I do not expect Morgan to turn on Vince and Zach, and I would expect Vince and Zach to eventually get a one-up on her. So I do feel like at this point, I'm pretty much willing to drop Morgan completely. The reason she's not even lower is, to be honest, I feel like everyone else is kind of drawing dead at this point. But beyond that, I think Morgan at least benefits a little bit from Jimmy leaving the game, where I feel like Morgan pushing for Jimmy isn't as disastrously bad for her game than it is for Mickey's. And I do think she's not as immediate of a target compared to Mickey. But at the same time, I just feel like Morgan is in a pretty unwinnable position, and unless she completely turns it around and really starts to open her eyes when it comes to Vince and Zach, I do not expect Morgan to win this game. And I do feel like at this point, Morgan is playing a losing game, which is why she's here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have yet another person who I'm not feeling that great about, but they are coming into this next week in a better position, kind of. And here we have Catherine. Now, again, Catherine has not moved up that much. I still don't really have that much faith in her as a player. I think she is still way too passive in the game. And I do think she gets very much lucky by the fact that Mickey just felt bad for putting up Riley after stealing his HOH, and through that doesn't decide to put up Catherine here, where I feel like Catherine was probably the most likely person to go up early on in the week, but after Mickey just started feeling bad and made this deal with Riley, it did result in Catherine not being put up. And I feel like Catherine herself did almost nothing to bring this about, and I feel like Catherine is someone who I just don't have that much faith in as a player. I feel like under most situations she would be put up in this spot and on her way out of the house, but through Mickey feeling bad and making this deal with her and Riley, I guess she's safe now. So I feel like she's in a better spot now than where she was before, though at the same time, not really due to anything she did. And I feel like moving forward, I'm still not expecting that much out of her. I'm still not expecting her to be a super likely winner. And I still think there are people who don't really trust her in that house and would put her up in the future. But at the same time, I feel like she's definitely coming to this week in a better spot than she was before, and certainly better than the people we already talked about. So it's for that reason that she's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have someone who I mentioned not too long ago, and here we have Riley. And it's kind of crazy that Riley is this high considering where he came into this week, where he did win the HOH initially, but had it stolen from Mickey due to her power. And obviously there's a lot to blame with him not picking Mickey in the interrogation, where he even knew at a point that Mickey did have the power, where it was pretty public knowledge that Mickey had the power, but somehow got tricked by Rachel and Ashley into thinking that Ashley had the power, which is obviously kind of funny there, but he obviously loses his HOH, doesn't react well to it, where he ends up lashing out afterwards, which is also not a great look. Also gets put up due to this, due to Mickey knowing that Riley was going to put her up, though is able to garner enough sympathy afterwards to where Mickey doesn't want to target him, and even goes so far as to not even put up Catherine, where it ends up resulting in Mickey making a pretty disastrous move for her game. And again, I don't really give Riley that much credit for this, where yeah, she does kind of make a deal with Mickey, though at the same time I feel like it was more so due to Mickey's actions than anything he did. And I still don't think he's playing that well, and I'm not really sure what to make of Riley's position at this point, Where, again, I feel like while he's technically coming out this week in a better position, I'm still not having that much faith in him as a player. And I feel like his position on this list is more so due to other people going down than him going up that much. But again, I still feel like this was a net positive for him. And it's for that reason that he's here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and we have perhaps the epitome of someone who is only going up due to other people going down. But at number 4, we do have Lauren. And again, I still don't think Lauren's that great of a player. I think her HOH reign was not good. And I think it just confirmed to me that she is not well respected in the house. I don't really expect her to win a jury vote if she gets towards the end. However, I do feel like she comes out this week in a pretty solid position where I do feel like her side of the house is pretty poised to gain numbers and really gain a lot of power in the house. And on top of that, she does have the true loyalty of Vince and Zach, to where I would expect them to take her deep into the game compared to Morgan, which is funny considering that Morgan is really pushing to work with Vince and Zach and doing more to enable them. Whereas I feel like Lauren is more so on the side. So I do feel like Lauren comes out of this week in a pretty good spot where, again, the house is shifting in her favor. She's not really being talked about as a target. And I feel like she is someone who is pretty poised to make a pretty deep run at this point. So I feel like those things are a major reason why she has moved up in this list. Even though I still have no faith in her to actually win the game, I feel like she's someone who it could be dragged through a lot of the game, and someone who I feel like if she were to get to the end, she is unlikely to win a jury vote. But again, it is the fact that she is pretty likely to be in the majority at this week, and with her not being targeted by many people, I feel like that was enough to have her here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we actually have the person who I had at number 1 last week. But number 3, we do have Ava. And truth be told, I think Ava's probably on a downswing where I feel like she is definitely coming out of this week in a worse spot, where she is definitely going to be in the minority moving forward. And there's definitely an argument for her being even lower, where, again, for one, she is losing Jimmy, which is bad for her game. Jimmy is a number 4 for her. And the fact that she pushed for it as well, like really advocated for it, really lowers my confidence in her as a player, where I feel like this week just demonstrated that I feel like she doesn't have the greatest game sense in the world. And the fact that she wanted Jimmy to be the renom, which is bad for her game, doesn't really give me that much confidence in her moving forward. And I think she's also kind of overestimating her relationship with Zach and Vince, to where she recognizes that she was pretty influential in them deciding to vote out Adrian last week. And while that is true, I do feel like it does also lead to her being a bit complacent as well, with her thinking that this shift towards the Zach and Vince side of the house and the power structure would benefit her as well, when I don't think it'll benefit her that much. So at the end of the day, I'm still not feeling that great about Ava, and I think she definitely demonstrates some bad tendencies across this week, and I'm definitely a lot less confident in her ability to win the game moving forward. Really, the reason she's this high is I feel like she's probably one of the less likely people to be targeted from her side of the house compared to other people, to where I could see her skating by for a bit. Then also, she's not really being talked about as a target. She's still pretty well liked socially in the house, and again, who knows what can truly happen there. But I feel like my confidence in her has really gone down compared to last week, which is why she's here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and I feel like this top 2 is pretty obvious. I had talked about them quite a bit during the video, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But number 2, I did decide to go with Zach here. And it's sort of funny seeing how Zach and Vince have really been on the rise across this week, where I was very critical last week about their votes to take out Adrian, and I still think it was a bad move for them. I still think them voting out Adrian was a pretty clear mistake. It clearly showed a lack of backbone in their game. And I also think Zach ended up taking a lot of heat for that decision, where we saw a lot of people like being pretty mad at them for Adrian going out, and Vince really throwing Zach under the bus there. And I don't think Zach really responded to that particularly well, though at the end of the day, he is still coming out of this week in a pretty solid position, where I feel like he ends up recovering pretty well due to Mickey really blowing up her side of the house, and really leaving Zach and Vince in this pretty prime position, where at this point they have a Final Four deal with Mickey and Morgan, and that does seem to be holding true, where at this point Mickey and Morgan are deciding to go all in on working with that, and I think that benefits Zach greatly in the game. So I feel like because of that, I feel like Zach is in, again, one of the best positions in the house, and it's sort of funny how he's in that despite him not really doing much to bring that about. So I feel like Zach is definitely pretty high because of that. The reason he's not higher, though, is while I think Zach is in a better short-term position compared to Vince, where less people are talking about targeting Zach in the next few weeks compared to Vince, I feel like Vince probably has a better connections to his side of the house that could eventually allow Vince to overtake Zach in a game. Then also, I feel like Zach again had lower lows early on the week where again he did take the brunt for Vince like blaming him for backing out the will plan. So I do feel like those things were enough to hold me back to where I decided to leave him behind here at number 2. And now at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother 27 at this current point is Vince. Now, I do think it's an interesting debate here between Vince and Zach, as I do feel like Vince is in more danger in the next few weeks, where I feel like more people are talking about targeting Vince. The likes of Rachel, for instance, are talking about targeting Vince. Even Kelly is picking up on Vince's game a bit more. I do think there is more worlds where Vince goes out in the next few weeks compared to Zach, and obviously that was a bit of a concern there. But at the same time, I do feel like Vince has better long-term prospects compared to Zach, where if you look at the people that they're close to, the likes of Catherine and Riley and Morgan, I do feel like Vince is closer to them compared to Zach is, where the likes of Morgan has talked about working with Vince more than with Zach. And I do feel like if it came down to it, that they would decide to work with Vince compared to Zach. I feel like that's something at least. Then also, I do think Vince did more work in throwing Zach under the bus after the Adrian vote, where while it is a mistake that he does vote out Adrian there, he was at least a bit closer to voting out Will, where we did see him struggle a bit more in the DR on eviction night. And then afterwards, he was more proactive in ensuring the blame went on to Zach compared to Vince. So I do feel like that's more impressive to me. And again, the fact that I do feel like he's better positioned with the people that they're working with is enough to where I decided to give Vince the edge, to where while there's definitely more of a risk of Vince being targeted in the next few weeks, I feel like it's the long-term prospects of Vince's game and his more proactive approach across this week that leaves him one spot higher to where he's here at number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps with the channel. Now we'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I'm live streaming the Thursday eviction episode on my channel, so if you want to see my live reaction and like really experience a show with me, feel free to do so. I'm also on Patreon and a YouTube membership, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also do it in the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.